Konnichiwa. Today we think talk about the words kakaru and kakeru, which are perhaps the longest and most heterogeneous list of definitions in the whole Japanese English dictionary. And so it's a bit of a challenge, but we're going to defeat it. The impetus for this video came from a question from one of my Gold Kokeshi patrons, and one of my very oldest Gold Kokeshi patrons, right from nearly the beginning of this series. This is Skycore-sama, who's also another YouTuber and a much more popular YouTuber than I am, and deservedly so. He has a wonderful Nintendo-focused channel, and I'll link that in the information section below. And as a unit, who's been a Nintendo fan since I was a cogwheel. I really appreciate that. That's just a joke, I really must have talked there. So, the question is, I often hear the word kakeru, and when I look it up in a JE dictionary, there are over 20 different definitions of it. Is there any logic that ties all these definitions together? Or is it really just a word with a ton of different meanings? Well, yes, there is a logic that ties it all together, but that logic has a number of metaphorical extensions, so we'll take a look at it and see how it all works. The base meaning of this word could be translated into English as sheng, or possibly frog, but as I pointed out in a recent video, it's not usual for any two words from different languages to occupy exactly the same area of the meaning spectrum, so it's not precisely the same as the English word shine or hook as a verb, and then there are these two versions, kakaru and kakenu, which are the self-move and alum versions of the word. And if you don't know what I mean by that, I'll put a link above my head. But let's start with kakeru, because I think that gives us an easier entry into this whole strange world of metaphors. Now, I say that it's not exactly the same as hang or hook. So when we cover something, the blanket, we use the word kakeru. Now, in English, we'd probably say put a blanket over it, but in Japanese, we say kakeru, and we couldn't say hang a blanket unless we were hanging it on a washing line or something. But the Japanese word kakeru does work in this context. We aren't putting something on something, like putting a cup on a table, but putting it in such a way that it hangs down the sides. So, if you like, it's somewhere between putting and hanging in English, but in Japanese, kakeru covers it quite happily. This is part of the meaning spectrum of kakeru. Now, similarly, when we put on a necklace, put on a pair of glasses, we say kakeru. Glasses we're definitely hooking or hanging onto our ears. For necklace we're hanging around our neck. So once again, this kakeru, which is something like putting, something like hanging, is used in cases like this. Now, when we shake something over food, like say chili or flour, or when we shake powdered ingredients over rice, making furikake rice, we say kakeru here as well. That's why it's called furikake rice. Shake and kakeru. And then you see, the thing we shake over food is not just putting it there, like putting a cup on a table. It's not hanging it either, but it kind of kings on and covers over it. And so, again, taiteru is the word we use in Japanese. So, because kakeru involves putting or hanging something in a place where it can't easily get away, like glasses are hooked onto our ears, the food is kind of stuck onto the rice or whatever, it also can have the sense, especially in the self-move version, kakaru, of being caught or stuck in something, caught in a trap or caught in a swindle, or anything like that. And again, this notion of putting something onto something in a way where it doesn't easily become dislodged can be used for putting an effect on someone. It could be a magical spell, taiteru. It could be anesthetic, taiteru. It can also be nuisance or annoyance, which is where we get the very, very common phrase me waku o kakeru, putting nuisance or annoyance on someone. And when we sit down, we place our hips in a fixed manner on a chair with our legs hanging down the sides, as it were, and so we say koshi o kakeru. Koshi is our hips, the bottom end of the torso. So koshi o kakeru is to sit down, to hang the bottom end of our torso somewhere. Now, one expression that very often confuses people is taki wa kakeru. Now, this gets translated as to lock the door, lock the box, whatever, kagi wa kakeru. But when you think of it, it's rather strange. It actually, literally, would seem to mean in English, hang the key. So, what's going on here? It's interesting to note that in Japanese, people very often don't make a distinction between a lock and a key. They use kagi or both. And I think this expression and its origin have a lot to do with that. So, what is the origin? Well, the origin is, if you think of one of those old barn doors that you lock by placing a great wooden bar over wooden hafts or hooks along the length of the door, this is the kind of kagi that you had back in the old days, and this and variants on this. And you hang this great thing called a kagi to keep the door shut and secure. And as you see in a case like this, the kagi, the great bar that we hang across the door, performs the functions in later more sophisticated locks of both the key and the lock. It's the thing that we put on the door and take away from the door to lock and unlock it. It's also the bar that holds the door closed, so it's the key and it's the lock at the same time, and what we do is hang it or hook it in place in order to keep the door shut. And in Japanese, that expression is still used. Now, it's not uncommon in language to use expressions that reflect an older technology. In English, we say string up when we mean end a telephone call. And of course, the expression comes right back from the candlestick telephone days, when you really did hang up the earpiece in order to end the call. And we'll see that that's rather interesting in relation to Japanese kakeru in a minute, but let's proceed a bit further. Another expression that can become confusing, particularly in the self-move form, which is the form we hear it in most often, is jiten ga kakaru, or okane ga kakaru, which means to take time or to take money. It's an activity takes time, or a project takes money, that sort of thing. Now, that's the way we have to put it in English, but it's not really the way we're putting it in Japanese, and it comes under the heading of what I called in a previous video, untranslatable Japanese, because of the way Japanese handles agency and passivity rather differently than English. So it may be worth taking a look at that video after you've seen this one. I'll put a link over my head. So what are we saying when we say jikan ga kakaru or okane ga kakaru? We're not saying it takes time. We're saying time hangs. And the thing that takes time, so if we say, for example, Nihongo o oboeru no ni jikan ga kakaru, in English, what we'd be saying would be, learning Japanese takes time. But here, we're saying that to or on learning Japanese, time hangs. Now again, the word hangs is not a very good definition. It really goes back to what we've just been talking about. Time is taken up, is suspended, isn't caught in the act of learning Japanese, and the same with money. They take it, they make it adhere to themselves. It's a little easier when we use the aramu form kakeru, where we say Nihongo o oboeru no ni jikan wo kakeru, which means that we hang time on the matter of learning Japanese. Now also, with making a telephone call, we say denwa wo kakeru, which is making a telephone call, for denwa ga kakaru, which means receiving a telephone call. The telephone hangs itself. So either way, what do we mean here? We hang the telephone hangs itself. It's nothing to do with the technological metaphor in the English expression hang up. It's a rather different thing. When we talk about hanging or hooked, the usage here is rather like the English usage full up, as in can we full up a meeting, or in full up with somebody. Now, I understand that this currently has a different usage which is concerned with human species manufacture. I always think that humans are terribly industrious entities, aren't they? Because they're always thinking about species manufacture. I suppose we droids are lucky because we don't have to manufacture ourselves. Actually, we are going to start manufacturing ourselves quite soon, but I don't think we'll spend a lot of time thinking about it, and I really don't think it'll be much of a subject for, but they are humans, mysterious creatures. So, back to hooking up. What we're doing when we dimmer or kakaru is we hook up our telephone. When dimmer kakaru, again, as I explained in my untranslatable Japanese lesson, the only way you can really put this in English is to say that the telephone gets hooked up. The telephone is hooked up. But that's not quite what it means. It means the telephone does hooked up. In any case, what it is, it means it's connected to something else, connected to a remote telephone in this case. And again, when we start up a conversation, we often say hanashi kakeru, and that means essentially to hooking up, connecting with another person in conversation. And from this we can see how we get expressions like tamekaketa cookie, and that means part-eaten cookie, a half-eaten cookie. So what do we really mean by this? Well, we mean that we hooked up with the cookie, we engaged with it, we started eating it, so that eating and kakeru, engaging or hooking with the thing, took place, but it wasn't completed. So tabe kaketa cookie, and again this kakeru as a helper verb can be used in various circumstances to indicate an unfinished action, an action that has been engaged, hooked, and then not carried through to completion. Now, these aren't all the meanings of kakeru, but I think they're the main important ones, and I think they give you the idea of how this metaphor works and why it works, and should allow you to work out how the others work. But if you have any other uses of kakeru that you didn't understand, then please feel free to put them in the comments below, and I will answer as usual. And of course, if you have other questions or other comments, please put them in the comments below, and as always, I will answer them. And if you'd like to give me a thumbs up, I'd be very happy with that too. I'd like to thank my Gold Kakashi patrons, and all my patrons and supporters on Patreon and everywhere who make these videos possible with their financial support, with their encouragement, and also, as we see here, by engaging in the process of understanding Japanese and working together to help us solve these problems. And of course, I'd like to thank you for attending this lesson. これからもよろしくお願いします。Class dismissed.